The Brown County Historical Commission and Brown Woods Lyric Theater, in cooperation with the Brown County Museum and the R.B. Rogers House and Events Venue, present Bygone Brown. Episode 7, Unreconstructed. In Brownwood's Greenleaf Cemetery, headstones and tombstones mark the final resting place of the deceased, preserving their names in an architecture of grief, a city of the dead built in the space beneath its trees. But among these stones stands a different kind of marker, a stela of granite engraved with 2 crossed flags, the one designed for peace, the other designed for battle, and a simple exhortation to remember the 175 veterans of the Confederacy who lie sleeping there, out of the almost 400 who rest in burial grounds across the county. The memorial honors the contributions these men made to the development of Brown County. No comparable monument recognizes the contributions of men who fought for the other side. The stela was erected in 2003 by the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Their website defines their purpose as principally defensive, to oppose any who might tarnish or distort the image of the Confederate soldier or his reasons for fighting. That purpose means the marker in Greenleaf Cemetery is as much about the present as it is about the past, more than just another memorial to the war's dead. It is a marker in an ongoing fight over the war's meaning, a fight perhaps made inevitable not because of the war itself, but because of its aftermath, because of Reconstruction. In the spring of 1865, Texas had approximately 600,000 Confederate troops still in arms, but once news reached the state of Lee's surrender that April, morale rapidly declined and military discipline with it. Desertions and looting were so widespread that by May 27th, the number of Confederate soldiers left in uniform had dropped by half to only 30,000. The state was in the grips of a panic, and on May 30th, the commanding officer of the Trans-Mississippi Department of the Confederate Army, Edmund Kirby Smith, demanded to know why.
Let me see that report, Captain.
I believe you are familiar with our findings, sir. Because of the influence of civilians...
Don't try my patience, officer. No man worthy of his uniform abandons his post. He fights on, retains his honor until the death. Not until he sees a pretty frock for his sweetheart in the storefront window.
Yes, sir. We know, sir, and agree, but...
But now we're going down half the troop strength we had a month ago, and in another month, I'll be a commander without an army, a general without troops.
A week later, on June 2, 1865, Smith surrendered to Union General Edward Canby, and then promptly left the state, as did many in the military and political classes who had either promoted or prosecuted the war, abandoning it to looters. The mayhem continued until June 19th, when 2,000 troops under the command of Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston to restore order, coming to end one problem while starting another.
The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves.
From that date, the 19th of June, the tradition of celebrating Juneteenth as a second Independence Day began. In 1979, Texas would be first in the nation to declare it a state holiday. Congress acknowledged the day in a joint resolution in 1997, and in 2021, Juneteenth was officially declared a federal holiday. but not everyone in Texas who heard of General Granger's order celebrated. In fact, the order and its implications would be strenuously resisted. The Articles of Secession, adopted by the Texas legislature in 1861 and authored by a committee chaired by John Henry Brown, the man for whose father Brown County was named, explained why.
Texas abandoned her separate national existence and consented to become one of the United States. She was received, maintaining and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of the African to the white race, a relation that has existed from the first settlement of her wilderness by the white race, and which her people intend should exist in all future time.
Although Brown himself fled Texas in General Joe Shelby's quixotic trek across Mexico, plenty of other Texans stayed behind, intent on preserving the servitude of the African to the white race. A number of local and vigilante groups formed to resist Reconstruction, among them the Knights of the White Camellia, the White Brotherhood, and the Palefaces, developing a blueprint for future resistance by blaming interfering radicals in Washington, foreigners, being transplants from other states, and lazy and shiftless Negroes unprepared for the responsibilities of citizenship to delay reforms. And these groups were not ashamed to use violence when they deemed it necessary.
Order! Order! Y'all settle down. I want to hear it from the defendant himself. Why did you shoot this colored man, this Negro?
Respect.
Respect? You want to explain that? Respect isn't a defense to murder.
Well, it ought to be. If they don't respect us, who's going to protect us? I had to shoot him. It was self-defense and civilizational defense.
Order! Order!
Reconstruction sought to dismantle the power structure of the antebellum South by freeing the slaves and disqualifying secessionists from holding public office, taking away the property and the power of the elite. The reformers' attack on property came from liberating the slaves at a time when 30% of the population of the state lived in bondage, and the average price of a slave was around $800, compared to the price of cattle of being $20 to $50 a head. To those who presumed a biblical and constitutional right to own other people, the enforcement of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation must have seemed like a massive theft of private property. Likewise, the reformers' attack on political power came from an amnesty oath the former Confederates were required to take before they could vote or be elected to public office, abjuring their allegiance to the Confederacy and declaring their loyalty to the United States. To those who once had ruled the state, however, the new requirements for public participation must have seemed like the basest tyranny, especially since it obligated those who thought their property had been stolen to pledge their loyalty to its thieves. To enforce the first of these reforms, the occupying military government established the Texas office of the Federal Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands in September 1865. Although the Bureau's main objective was to find good-paying jobs for former slaves, it met resistance. As a result, within a year of its formation, and contrary to the original mandate, the Freedmen's Bureau ironically wound up putting former slaves back into the very same farms where they had been enslaved, this time, though, as tenant farmers.
Well, how y'all doing now y'all so free?
Oh, no, tain't bad, Massa. Tain't bad at all. But truth be told, tain't no good neither.
Oh yeah? How's that, boy?
Can't get no work now, gots to pay for things.
Well, maybe we can help you. Of course, we can't pay much. Time's hard for all of us.
Oh, ain't that the truth?
But if y'all's amenable, we could see about bringing y'all back on the old place. I mean, we know y'all, and y'all know the work.
Oh, thank you, sir. That's awful white of you. Thank you.
Washington's attempts to reform the political organization of Texas met with even more frustration. Originally, under Lincoln's own plan for Reconstruction, only 10% of a southern state's population had to pledge allegiance to the United States and ratify the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery before being allowed to draft a new state constitution and be readmitted to the Union. In other words, 90% of a state's population could cling to their old ways. After Lincoln's assassination, however, Republicans in Congress wanted revenge, and overriding the veto of Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, who was unusually a Democrat and a slave owner from Tennessee, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act of 1866, putting the former states of the Confederacy under military rule. A number of military commanders would oversee Texas without the troop strength necessary to maintain order, let alone overhaul its economy and politics. From an initial presence of 51,000 soldiers, the occupying army had dwindled to only 3,000 by the end of the first year of Reconstruction, making its chances for success all but impossible and encouraging the unreconstructed rebels in the state to play for time. One commander became so frustrated with the recalcitrance of former Confederates at the local level that he summarily dismissed all elected county officials, including those of Brown County.
We got business to take care of right here. What's that look for?
Reynolds says y'all can't be here.
Reynolds?
Yeah, that Yankee general sent by Washington.
I know who he is. I don't know what he's thinking.
Well, I understand it. We's disqualified because we served the Confederacy.
Well, that's why I don't understand him. All of us serve the Confederacy.
I know.
Well, that means none of us who knows anything about the business of this county could have anything to do with the running of it.
Well, there's new folks are coming in.
Well, most of them is coming here from other southern states, which means they's disqualified too.
Yeah, I reckon so.
You reckon? And who's you reckon going to be left to run things around here but scallywags, carpetbaggers, or niggers?
With opposition to its efforts increasing, the Army eventually resorted to plainly undemocratic means to achieve its goal of getting Texas back into the Union. In 1868, they organized an election for delegates to a second state constitutional convention, which white conservatives boycotted. The document produced by that convention included a number of provisions the conservatives would never support, including greater powers for the governor, a statewide system of public education, state support for economic development, encouragement of immigration, and most worrying of all, extending the vote to blacks, and in one draft, even women. Though intensely hated by conservatives, this 1869 Constitution was ratified in January 1870. A new legislature and state officials were elected under it in February, and they ratified the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment, granting former slaves equal rights with whites, and the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing them the right to vote. All of them requirements of being readmitted to the Union, but none of them acquired through a popular vote. Regardless of how the consent was obtained, Reconstruction formally ended when then President U.S. Grant signed the act readmitting Texas to the Union that March. But by then, the damage had been done, and the damage was deeply personal. Washington, through an occupying military, had forced its will on Texas, and as soon as that military left, Texas started to undo the damage. At the first general election after Reconstruction, voters put the Republicans out of power indefinitely. It would be 100 years before another Republican would be elected to statewide office again. And in 1876, voters ratified yet a third new state constitution, the one still in effect, with limited powers for the governor, precinct-level voting, local control over education, and elections for every conceivable office, from county sheriff to Supreme Court judge. An adamant assertion that the government that governs least governs best, and, as if that were not clear enough, a declaration in its Bill of Rights that the military shall at all times be subordinate to the civil authority, reactions all, enshrined in the state constitution of never wanting to be dictated to again. The sentiment that underlay this repudiation of Northern reforms that literally were the price of Texas rejoining the Union would be captured in the memoir of former Confederate President Jefferson Davis.
Well may we rejoice in the regained possession of self-government. This is the great victory. A total non-interference by the federal government with the domestic affairs of the states.
And repudiating the superior morality many in the North thought justified those reforms, Davis wrote that slavery was in no wise the cause of the conflict, and that slaves had been contented with their lot until Northern agitators tempted them into rebellion, a central belief in what became known as the Lost Cause, after the title of an early history of the war published in 1866. The mythos of the Lost Cause offered a balm to salve the Southern ego, that the war was fought over high principles, not narrow interest, for states' rights against central government tyranny, for Southern valor against Northern perfidy, to preserve an antebellum Eden of manners and yes-ma'ams, of happy slaves and benevolent masters, of Southern belles and crinoline gowns and dashing men come a-courtin', of an obedient, respectful, well-ordered, and Christian society, invaded and violated by a godless, crass, and materialistic North, of a real America attacked by a fake one. In the view of some historians, belief in the lost cause may have ironically helped the South reintegrate with the North by turning the former Confederates from rebels into patriots, from enemies of the Constitution to its most passionate defenders, and their message of taking the country back into a potent political rallying cry. Lost cause organizations would come to dominate how the South interpreted the war. Among them, the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Sons of Confederate Veterans, the group who erected that granite stela in Greenleaf Cemetery. Their website explaining why.
The citizen soldiers who fought for the Confederacy personified the best qualities of America. The preservation of liberty and freedom was the motivating factor in the South's decision to fight the Second American Revolution. The tenacity with which Confederate soldiers fought underscored their belief in the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. These attributes are the underpinning of our democratic society and represent the foundation on which this nation was built.
Recorded live at the R.B. Rogers House and Events Venue. Bygone Brown is a co-production of the Brown County Historical Commission and Brownwood's Lyric Theater. The series was written by Lamar Cravens and narrated by Tommy Bailey, with the vocal talents of Drex Holt, Jacob Bierman, Alexander Glass, Ryan Bailey, Walker Willie, Jonathan Harvey, Dominique Glaske, Elisa Hinton, Aaliyah Curtis, Tracy Brandon Tucker, Mackenzie Lair, Susie Harkey, Graham Allen, Val Nelson, Levi Packer, Matthew McNeese, Nick Ewan, Joe and Laisha Dennis, and Doug, Shannon, and Aaron Turner.